Hey there, just a quick disclaimer. I realized after the editing of this video that I had accidentally referred to Darting Blow as giving 4 AS instead of 5 AS multiple times throughout the video. Unfortunately, I had already deleted some of the raw audio by the time I realized this, so fixing it in the body of the video would require scrapping the entire thing from scratch. I added a couple of visual corrections, but just bear in mind anytime that I talk about Darting Blow, it actually grants 5 speed, not 4. The reclassing system in Fire Emblem Fates is really cool, and makes its cast into one of the most flexible yet distinct band of characters we've had yet. Rather than letting everyone reclass into everything like Engage in 3 Houses do, Fates gives each individual unit a restricted class set. Specifically, they get 2 classes. They can either stay in their base class or reclass into an alternate one. However, each class has a branching promotion, giving a grand total of 4 promoted classes to each unit, and pre-promotes can freely reclass between all 4 of them. But you can also expand your class set through the support system, marrying anyone of the opposite gender, and building friendship with one of a select pool of same-gender characters, thus giving you access to up to 4 class trees in a single playthrough. And the Generation 2 characters pump this up to 5 due to the way that inheritance works. I really like this system because while it gives you a great amount of freedom in sculpting your units, it also offers restriction. What people have in their base class set is always going to be fixed, and the friendship pool they have access to is also limited. The Revelation route combining the Nohrian and Hoshidan casts simultaneously gives you more freedom and make units feel more distinct, as now everyone can marry and friendship across national lines, but they can only marry and friendship specific cross-route people. For example, while Niles is able to marry any Nohrian unit from the Hoshidans, his only options are Setsuna and Oboro, and his only Hoshidan friendship option is Tsubaki. I absolutely love this system, because it strikes the perfect balance between customizability and unit distinction. You can use the same units and have them look drastically different from each other from playthrough to playthrough. Yet, at the same time, the units are not so homogeneous a blob that everyone can accomplish the same tasks as each other. And in fact, almost every character in the cast has something unique that only they can do, due to their unique combination of base classes, friendships, and romances. Do you want rally skills, speed, strength, and defense on the same Generation 1 unit? Well, you gotta go with Selena. Want to combine as many breaker skills as possible? Then I hope you like Felicia, cause she's your only option. Do you want a physical wall who can equip every debuffing skill? Well, then Hinata is your go-to guy. The list goes on, and in fact that's why I'm doing this series, to point out all these cool ways that the cast is unique from each other. But there are a few characters who don't fit this mold. Referred to by the community as Corrinsexuals, there is a group of unlucky pre-promotes who are unable to participate in the support system, instead only being able to support with the avatar, Corrin. Meaning, in theory, you can bless one of these characters with an extra class set, but in practice, that's oftentimes not the best thing to do, since Corrin Marriage is a unique and powerful one-of-a-kind resource. The devs realized that not being able to support was a handicap, and so they gave these units 3 classes in their base set instead of the normal 2. In addition, because Corrinsexuals are all pre-promotes, they tend to have higher stats for less investment than the people around them. But the support system is a fundamental mechanic in the Fates games, not only providing your cast with such a large flexibility, but also giving you access to child paralogues, which unlock new characters and give extra opportunities for EXP. So just how good can a unit be if they are completely denied access to that system? I aim to answer that question today by looking at the strongest Corrinsexual in the Fates trilogy, Revelation Reina. This video is part of an ongoing series with the goal to do a deep dive into every single playable unit in Fire Emblem Fates Revelations. Yes, even that one. Despite the fact that the game has a reputation for being terribly unbalanced, I truly believe that every member of the cast can contribute to your team. But units in Fates are highly customizable, and this goes doubly so for Revelations, where each cast member has new options that are not available on their native routes. And so my goal is to go over the multiple potential builds that every member of the roster has. That way, if you want to play through Rev on its highest difficulty, you can utilize whoever your favorite characters are. I'm not going to pretend that all of these units are equally viable. In fact, a secondary goal of the series is to come up with a Revelation tier list. But I really do believe that everyone is at least salvageable and can offer you something unique. While this series is going to be focused around the lunatic difficulty, much of what I say can also apply to the lower difficulties of hard and normal. Those difficulties have lower numbers for the enemies, so it's easier to reach stat thresholds, but things like various reclasses, available friendships, and specific builds that you can go into stay universal despite what difficulty you intend to play on. With all that out of the way, let's dive into our unit review. God, that's either the worst or best series name I've come up with. There's no middle ground. Reina joins you in Chapter 11 as a Kinshi Knight with incredibly cracked base stats. Her 18 strength and 21 speed allow her to one-round most unpromoted enemies for the next few maps completely unassisted. Not only that, but she's one of your better answers to the promoted enemies Rev starts throwing at you as early as her join map. 16 skill and 15 luck are also quite notable, as her accuracy will be very good, meaning that she can be depended upon to hit dodgy enemies like ninja and swordmasters. Meanwhile, if you're facing a slower foe like a general, you can whip out a Yumi, because the lower hit of Yumi is offset by Reina's naturally high skill and luck stat, so she can leverage their higher might in order to do better damage. Reina's defenses are not spectacular. She has 10 defense and 13 resistance with a paltry 28 HP. At the time she joins, this is enough to take a few hits, and she will be able to frontline if you want her to. But Reina in the long term really wants to focus on nuking people. But this isn't as much of a downside as it might seem. Enemies are incredibly threatening in Revelation, so it's rare to find someone who can frontline. Usually it's better to take care of threats on player phase than try your hand at enemy phase gaming. Despite being a physical unit, Reina does also have a non-zero magic stat, with 4 magic at base, all of which comes from her personal stats. That being said, a base magic of 4 with a 5% growth rate is not enough to justify going into a magical build, especially since you would be giving up such phenomenal physical stats. One of the funny things about Reina's stats in Rev as compared to Birthright is she actually got a buff to her bases. She has 1 extra point of strength, speed, and luck, and 2 extra points of skill as compared to her Birthright iteration, despite both of them joining in the game's Chapter 11s. While many of the minor buffs and nerfs given to units in Revelation feel random, Reina is the one unit where there seems to be a logical reason for this stat change. That 1 extra point of speed is particularly notable because it means that combined with her native skill of Darting Blow, which gives +4 attack speed on initiation, Reina is able to double Flora in Chapter 12 without needing any assistance. And in Chapter 11, Reina is able to double Kotaro with just +2 speed, aka the minimum amount you can gain with either a tonic or any speed pair-up. Technically speaking, Birthright Reina can still double Kotaro in Chapter 11 because Samurai and Ninja each give 3, but Archer only gives 2 speeds, so these extra bases do give her more flexibility. Now, traditionally, if you get handed an early game pre-promote with incredibly good bases, you expect that their growth rates are not up to snuff. But Reina bucks this trend as well. In her base class of Kinshi, she has a 50% strength growth and a 60% speed growth, meaning that her offenses will keep pace as long as you feed her experience. And the majority of these numbers come from Reina's own personal growths, as she has 45 apiece in both of these stats. Reina's other growth rates are relatively unimpressive. I wouldn't call them outright bad, but she's not going to be winning any awards for the number of times she levels res. But honestly, that's okay. As a Kinshi Knight, high strength and high speed are really all you need. As long as Reina continues to get level ups, her stats will remain impressive for the entirety of the game. But Reina is a pre-promoted unit in Chapter 11, and Fates' experience system can be quite harsh to promoted units. The experience system in Fates isn't 100% understood, especially when it comes to things like staff experience, and most of my own understanding comes from the research other people have done on Cernus Forest and Reddit. If you want to read them for yourself, there will be links in the description. When killing an enemy who has the same level as you, you will gain 30 experience. However, if an enemy is lower level than you, you gain roughly 6 less experience per level, until you are killing enemies 5 levels below you, at which point you hit the soft EXP cap and only get 1 experience per kill. In addition to that, you will get 0 for chipping or dual striking these enemies. In contrast, if you are under-leveled, you will gain more experience, roughly 10 extra experience for fighting an enemy 3 levels higher than you. These numbers are not exact. There's some amount of weird rounding that I can't find the information on, so if anyone knows better than me, please tell me in the comments. But one thing that is noteworthy is rather than taking your displayed level into account, they take your internal level. For unpromoted units, this doesn't matter, because their displayed level is going to be their internal level. But for promoted units, there is a formula for determining what their internal level is. When a unit uses a Master Seal to promote, they will gain what is called a cumulative level, equal to their current displayed level plus 20 divided by 2. So if a unit promotes at level 20, they gain a cumulative level of 20. Meanwhile, if a unit promotes at level 10, they gain a cumulative level of 15. If you want to hyper-optimize, it's worth noting that the cumulative level rounds down in its calculation, so level 11 also gains a cumulative level of 15. But within casual play, I don't think this is terribly relevant. A cumulative level stat does not ever change, and instead, your displayed level is added to your cumulative level, and that is what your internal level is. So, if a unit promotes at level 10, and thus gets a cumulative level of level 15, then as a level 1 promoted unit, they will have an internal level of 16. Thus causing a unit who promoted at level 10 to gain experience as if they were 5 levels lower than a unit who promoted at level 20. This makes early promotion in Fates a bit of a trade-off. You will initially slow your experience gain, but you will gain more experience late game than other promoted units would. And this can allow you to get some of the high-level promoted skills faster than if you promoted at level 20. Now, the units who begin in promoted classes also follow this same experience formula, but because they never used a Master Seal, their cumulative level is pre-established by the developers. This is why Jacob and Felicia gain experience as if they were unpromoted, because they have a cumulative level of 0, meaning that their internal level matches their displayed level despite their promoted class. Reina and Camilla, on the other hand, have a cumulative level of 15, meaning that for the purposes of calculating EXP, the game treats them as if they promoted at level 10. As a result of this, Reina's experience gains are not as bad as you would expect. In chapters 11 and 12, all of the unpromoted enemies are level 10 or lower, so Reina is at the soft EXP cap for them, but when fighting promoted enemies, they are treated as if they are 5 levels higher than her. And so it's not at all unreasonable for Reina to get a level or 2 under her belt, especially since she is one of your best solutions to these scary promoted foes. And as the game goes on, promoted units become more frequent and unpromoted units become higher level, allowing Reina's EXP to keep pace. Don't get me wrong, she is still going to be leveling slower than your other unpromoted units, but she also doesn't need nearly as much help as they do. Her base stats are more than good enough to coast off of for most of the game. People often praise the late game pre-promotes you get, such as Shura and Ryoma, but Reina's bases are not far behind them, despite the fact she joins several chapters earlier with a lower internal level. Of course, these stats don't tell the entire story. Reina's don't show that she has Darting Blow for +4 speed on player phase, Ryoma's don't account for the bonuses from Rajinto and Bushido, and Shura's don't factor in the fact he has +1 move. but it does paint a rather telling picture of just how close Reina is at base to units who show up much later and are considered good at their join time. Now, Reina's starting class and base stats are not the only good thing about her. Her personal skill is not only quite impactful, but synergizes well with the role that Reina wants to take on. Morbid Celebration has Reina recover 20% HP whenever she initiates and kills an enemy. Due to her emphasis on offense as opposed to bulk, Reina prefers attacking uncountered, especially by using bows. She does have enough bulk to take 1 or 2 hits depending on the enemies, but doesn't want to face more than that without some amount of healing. But Morbid Celebration provides just this for her. 20% isn't a lot, but it can often get her to the point where she can take another hit. This is especially relevant when fighting ninjas and mages since they are able to counter from 2 range, but Morbid Celebration will offset the majority of the damage they deal on counter. In combination with the Camaraderie skill, which heals 10% HP if you start your turn with an ally within 2 spaces, Reina can push her middling bulk to pretty incredible heights, freeing up staffers to focus their actions on other units, or freeing your deployment slots to just not field any staffers at all. Reina's starting weapon ranks are also quite nice. She has D rank bows and C rank lances. In some ways, it would be better if these ranks were reversed, as it would let Reina take advantage of the higher weapon rank bonuses whenever she uses bows. But I don't think this is as big a deal as some people make it out to be, and honestly, there are some ways in which the rank ordering is an upside. Reina is going to be doing the majority of her combat with bows, they're just the better weapon type. As a result of this, she'll be gaining bow experience significantly faster than lance experience. At the time that Reina joins, the only bows available are E or D rank, and it only takes 30 combats to reach C rank bows. I find it incredibly unlikely that Reina doesn't see 30 rounds of combat in the 3 chapters between her join and the level 2 shops being available. And as a result of this, she almost certainly has C rank by the time the dual Yumi becomes available. And the dual Yumi is likely the highest rank bow that you want to use. Situationally, I can see the Surefire Yumi coming up, and because Reina is primarily a player phase unit, there might be times in which Silvers and Braves can help her, but I struggle to think of a time in which I used a Silver or Brave on Reina. And I've arm scrolled her to S as a sniper before, so it's not like she didn't have the rank for them. As a result of this, the only thing that Reina is missing out on from the lower rank is the damage boost that comes with bow rank. Don't get me wrong, this is undeniably a downside, but it's a smaller one on a unit like Reina than it would be on someone like Kaze. She gets the majority of her damage from raw stats. In contrast, C rank lances does have a number of helpful applications. You have a Steel Lance and technically a Killer Lance at the time that Reina joins, so she can immediately add these to her arsenal, and the Steel Lance is actually useful, unlike Fate's Killers. It can bolster your damage output against the sorcerers in Chapter 12, potentially allowing Reina to avoid a counter. The only other units who are likely able to wield this are Gunter and Oboro. Gunter is nearing his expiration date when Reina shows up, and Oboro would prefer speed support as opposed to a weapon that weighs her down. In the long term, C-rank lances can also potentially help Reina, allowing her to equip either the dual Naginata or guard Naginata in order to increase her survivability, although I feel like these applications are much more niche. With proper positioning, Reina shouldn't be taking much damage anyway, although the dual Naginata can increase her own damage output, so that's nice. Reina's class set is also quite good. She starts as a Kinshi Knight, which is probably her best class overall, making her a unit that really does not demand any amount of investment. Kinshi gives her 8 move and flight, which is really helpful in the mid-game of Rev. In fact, you can see the impactfulness of being airborne as early as her join map, as her starting map features a large amount of forests that she can fly over, including some that are impassable to grounded units. Having access to both lances and bows is also quite nice. Bows have the highest might and accuracy of all weapon types in exchange for being 2-range locked, but being 2-range locked is arguably an advantage, especially in Rev where you want to be doing most of your combat on player phase, as Reina and other bow users can select targets that are unable to counter them. And the fact that Reina has lance access is beneficial for quite a few reasons. If you run into a situation where you need to fight someone at one range, either because it's an enemy archer or because you're fighting them on enemy phase, then lances will solve that problem for you. But lances also give Reina access to effective damage, which bows surprisingly don't frequently do in Rev, as flyers are exceptionally rare in the mid-game, and even in the late game they are not that common. One of the earliest effective weapons you can get is a lance, the sword catcher from Kaldori's Paralogue. And this damage boost is nice for fighting against some of the dangerous sword enemies, such as paladins and swordmasters. But the sword catcher isn't even Reina's best weapon against paladins, because in the level 2 shop you can purchase a beast killer, which is effective against the large number of horses in the mid-game. Lastly, lances help with triangle control, because they are a blue weapon, while bows are green. If you're not aware, the triangle in Fates features more than just swords, lances, and axes. There are red weapons, blue weapons, and green weapons, and I remember these like Pokemon, because Bulbasaur beats Squirtle beats Charmander beats Bulbasaur. Lances will have advantage over tomes and swords. This is mostly relevant for chapters 12 and 13, as you can purchase a dual Yumi before chapter 14, which reverses the weapon triangle and allows Reina to use bows at advantage. But it is worth noting that the level 2 shop only has one dual Yumi, so if you're using multiple bow users, which you probably should be, Reina's ability to use lances means you can give the dual Yumi to one of your other archers. Well, I say archers, but technically Reina's version of Kinshi Knight comes from Sky Knight, which means she starts out with Darting Blow and Camaraderie instead of Skill +2 and Quick Draw. If you're just staying in Kinshi Knight, then this is probably better for Reina than Archer would be, because Darting Blow can help with some doubling thresholds and add more damage than Quick Draw would as a result. But if you're trying to reclass Reina, then it kinda stinks that she has Falcoknight instead of Sniper access. But on the topic of reclassing, let's take a look at what Reina's other options are. Falcoknight is mostly a downgrade over Kinshi for Reina. You do get some extra strength, speed, defense, and res, so your lance combat will be a little bit better, but that's not worth giving up bows for. And in exchange, all you're handed is E-rank stabs. Stabbing is already not great in Fates in my opinion, but it's even worse if you are converting a unit who should be doing combat into a staff bot. Falcoknight's skills also don't offer much for Reina. Rally speed is a utility skill, and Reina wants to be the one getting rallied, not the one giving them. Warding Blow is at least interesting. It gives Reina 20 extra resistance on player phase, and since mages are one of the few enemy types that is consistently able to counter her, it is nice to get this extra bulk boost, especially since it comes at level 15, meaning that it will mostly be around for the late game, where there are plenty of powerful, scary mages. I don't think I would necessarily recommend dipping into Falco just to get Warding Blow, but there are worse things you can do with your Heart Seal. For example, you could use them to turn Reina into an Omnioji. Despite the fact that Reina does have a personal magic base and growth, it is not nearly high enough to justify sending her into a magical class, especially not Omnioji, which is one of the worst, if not just the worst magical class. As far as skills are concerned, it gives Magic +2, which boosts your magic by 2, Rally Magic, which boosts allies' magic by 4, and Tome Fair, which gives you +5 damage when using a tome. There's also Future Sight, which is a incredibly bad skill. It is a player phase only luck % chance to double the experience you gain on kill. I've actually heard some people recommend sending Reina into Omnioji or Basara just to grab Future Sight because as a promoted unit, her experience gain is bad, so you'll want to double it. But this is a really bad idea. Like, obviously you do you, I'm not going to tell you how to play a game, but it's not worth spending 2 Heart Seals to get Reina this luck % chance to double her experience gain, when the game already gives her favoritism with an accelerated experience gain based on its mechanics. And no, going Basara so that you can keep the Lance rank is also not enough to justify Future Sight. It's just a bad skill. But on the topic of Basara, this at least is a competent combat class for physical units. Much like Falcoknight, reclassing to Basara will increase Reina's stats as compared to Kinshi. But now not only are you giving up bows, but you are also giving up flight. There are actually some maps where it's better to be grounded than flying, but most of them come in the very late game. Especially in the stretch of chapters right after you get Reina, if a unit has the stats to make a flying class work, you probably want them in that flying class. And as we just discussed, Reina's stats are good enough for Kinshi. As far as skills are concerned, Basara gives you Rend Heaven, which is a 1.5 times your skill % chance to increase damage depending on whether you're using magical or physical by the enemy's strength or magic. If you're using a physical weapon, which Reina probably will be, it will scale off of the enemy's strength. Quixotic, on the other hand, adds a 30 hit to both you and the opponent, and gives you a plus 15% chance to proc skills. It also gives the opponent 15% extra chance for proc skills, but the only proc skill in Revelation is Vengeance on Iago in Chapter 17. Although, I guess it could come up for some of the child paralogues. So be careful if you accidentally inherit Astra onto Percy, because he will proc it against Reina if you give her Quixotic. These skills can be helpful for some units, but I don't think they're particularly beneficial to Reina. Despite that, Basara is the first class that I can see sending Reina in that doesn't feel like throwing. Once you're in Anankos' castle, there's a surprisingly large amount of bow units, and there's no more terrain to fly over, so unless you plan on doing some late paralogues, flight just becomes a detriment. That being said, if you do want to land Reina, there is a much better class option, and that is Mechanist. This allows her to maintain her bow rank, but also gives her access to daggers, and daggers occupy the same area in the weapon triangle as lances, so she has the same level of weapon triangle control as she did as a Kinshi. In addition to that, daggers feature their own powerful effective weapons. The Hunter's Knife is a 1-2 range beast killer. It's got a little bit less might, but in exchange you can attack uncountered. Meanwhile, the Sting Shuriken is the only weapon that Reina can use to deal effective damage against armors. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the Sting Shuriken. Rev does not give you a Sting Shuriken for free, instead you have to purchase it, and at that point I would much rather just spend the gold on a hammer, since that has higher might and will have weapon triangle advantage over the majority of armors. But if you're not using any axe users, or you just want to give multiple effective weapons to your team, the Sting Shuriken is a decent option, and the ability to use it uncountered is a genuine boon. Reina gets Mechanist from the Ninja class line, so she can technically also go Master Ninja, but I think this is mostly worse than Mechanist for her sake. It gives more skill, speed, and res than Mechanist, and can potentially help Reina to double some of the fastest enemies in the endgame, but in my opinion, losing bow access is not worth this trade-off either. And it's not like Master Ninja's skills offer that much for Reina anyway. Lethality gives you a chance to instantly kill the enemy, but it is ridiculously low, using a quarter of your skill stat as the % chance. It does give you a very funny animation, but Reina is able to kill enemies without it quite easily. I don't think you should waste your time or your slots on this. Shuriken Fair is a +5 damage boost when using hidden weapons, and that can be nice, since it raises the might of your daggers to 1 above the equivalent rank bow. But unless you've been using hidden weapons for a significant portion of the game, your bow rank is likely higher than your dagger rank, and if that's the case, weapon level bonuses almost certainly mean that your bows will outpace daggers even if you give Shuriken Fair to Reina. I guess if you early reclass to Mechanist or Ninja and focus on that dagger rank, this can be nice, but that feels like a waste of Reina's natural talents. That's not to say that the Ninja line is completely devoid of skills that matter. Mechanist offers Golem Bane, which in Rev might as well be a blank skill slot, but it also gives you Replicate, which allows Reina to create a second copy of herself. These copies share a lot of attributes. For example, if you rally one, it affects the stats of both, and they have a shared HP bar that if one dies, both of them do. Additionally, equipping a weapon with one of the replicas will equip the other one with that same weapon. although some traits do not get passed to the replica. For example, if you have Amaterasu, the replica will not be able to proc that aura. And because the replicas are seen as a different unit than Reina, they do not have support ranks with anyone. Although in Reina's case, this is hardly ever relevant. Since Reina is already a very good combat unit, having a second copy of her is nice. But funny enough, I don't even necessarily think Replicate is the strongest thing that Reina gets from the ninja line. Because upon a single level up in either Master Ninja or Mechanist, Reina gets Lock Touch. Lock Touch is a very simple skill, it lets you open chests. But because chest keys in Rev are not carried from map to map, on most maps that have treasure, you want to deploy a unit with Lock Touch to get the treasure. Now, there are plenty of good units that can learn Lock Touch, so it's not that much of a restraint on team building. But it can be a restraint on unit building, because you only get 5 skill slots, and a lot of units want to reclass pretty heavily in order to gain skills from other trees. Because Reina's base class set doesn't really offer her much in the way of useful skills, Lock Touch is relatively free on her, and as a result of that, you can afford to get other units more powerful skills through their friendships and marriages. Kind of a weird catch-22 to Reina's limited class set. It is also noteworthy that Reina can have Lock Touch on a flying class. As for chapters 22 and 23, it's quite beneficial to be able to fly and open chests. Although, in fairness, you could also just pair your Lock Touch user into a flying unit. So it's not the end of the world if you have Niles as your honorary Lock Touch bot. Now, technically, these 6 classes are not the only ones that Reina can access. Like any unit in the game, she can marry Corrin and gain their Heart Seal talent as an additional class. Now, Corrin Marriage is an incredibly valuable one-of-a-kind resource, so giving it up is not something you should do lightly. But I think there is a legitimate argument that Reina is one of the better people to marry as a male Corrin, especially if you're a physically based male Corrin. A magical Corrin would probably rather pass Dark Mage onto one of the other magically oriented units, but if you're doing a magical Corrin that uses some of the magic weapons, then it's possible you gave yourself a talent Reina could benefit from. As a side note, I've been thinking about doing a tier list of what the best options for Corrin to marry in Revelations are. If that's the sort of thing you'd be interested in, let me know in the comments, and make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss it if I post it. If you've already decided that women who want to kill you are hot, then you might be wondering what the best talent to pass on to Reina is, and I think there's a pretty clear winner in the Archer class. Adding this to her class pool allows Reina to get Quick Draw and Skill plus 2 without needing to spend a seal. Skill plus 2 does exactly what it sounds like, and Quick Draw gives you an extra 4 damage on player phase. In exchange for these skills, Reina will give Corrin Sky Knight, meaning that if he goes Kinshi Knight, he will pick up Camaraderie and Darting Blow for free. This on its own is already enough to justify the marriage, in my opinion, but it gives an additional benefit to Reina with the option to reclass to Sniper instead of Mechanist whenever you want to dismount. Sniper is mostly better than Mechanist. You lose access to the blue portion of the weapon triangle, but you can just use a dual Yumi to make up for that. In exchange, you get better stats and arguably better skill access in Certain Blow and Bowfare. Bowfare gives you plus 5 damage when using a bow, which Reina almost always wants to, and Certain Blow gives you 40 hit on initiation. If you combine that with Reina's already naturally quite high skill, there is almost nothing that can escape her bow. But in addition to bolstering reliability, Certain Blow can offhandedly help with your damage output. You see, the Hoshiden variant of bows are Yumi. Yumi have an extra point of might compared to their Norian counterparts, but suffer 10 less hit. They also give you 2 more resistance, which can be relevant when fighting mages, but generally I don't think is such a big deal, especially on Reina. Personally, I think a single point of might is not enough to make up for losing 10 hit. But with Certain Blow adding plus 40 hit, you can often reach 100% thresholds with a Yumi instead of a bow, giving you an extra point of damage, or 2 if you double. Now, in my opinion, Archer talent is going to do more for Reina than any other class. But if you are not sold, there are a couple of other potential contenders. The most notable of which is Outlaw. This would give Reina access to Adventurer and Bow Knight. I don't think Adventurer offers much, although you could get pass at level 15, which allows you to pass through enemies. But Bow Knight is another powerful grounded class that uses bows. The Adventurer variant will get Lock Touch and Move +1, which does exactly what it sounds like. I don't love Rally skill on Reina for the same reasons I don't like the other rallies, but Shuriken Breaker at level 15 is actually quite good. It gives you an additional 50 hit and avoid if your opponent is using a hidden weapon. This is once again a late game skill, but there are a lot of ninjas in late game Rev. Reina already has quite good matchups against hidden weapon users, but Shuriken Breaker makes it even better. It is worth noting that Rev Master Ninjas usually have both a Shuriken and a Katana, so if they are able to reach you at one range, you will not have the 50 hit and avoid against them. But chapters 21, 24, and 25 have a surprising number of opportunities to set up to enemy phase with bows. And Shuriken Breaker also helps out on player phase, both to avoid counter and to get more accuracy, especially since you'll be missing out on certain blow if you go with Outlaw talent. I still think Outlaw is a step down from Archer, but it's probably the next best thing you could be doing. I don't really love any other classes for Reina, but since she does have native Lance rank, you could theoretically focus on that aspect of her kit. Spearfighter will give her access to Spearmaster for better grounded combat and eventually Lance fare, and Wyvern talent allows her to retain Flight and Lance access while further bolstering her stats. We're really scraping the bottom of the barrel here, but you could also go with Cavalier and spend a map dipping in for Elbow Room and Defender, but at that point you're spending 2 seals to give +4 damage to Reina, and you can already do that with 0 seals with Archer talent, because Quick Draw also gives +4 damage. Yes, technically Elbow Room and Defender are dual phase, and technically Defender gives more than just strength, but Reina typically isn't a unit who wants to dual phase. So like 90% of the time, Quick Draw will just be doing the job of the Cavalier skills with less investment. Cavalier does also give Reina shelter, and having shelter on a flying unit is quite useful, as I talked about in the Gunter video. And Reina being able to shelter Azura in order to set up for her own shelter sing is something that can potentially come up. If you want to meme around, then Great Knight technically gives Armor Blow, which boosts her defense on player phase by 20. In conjunction with Warding Blow from her native Falcoknight, you can just get a damage reduction of 20 on player phase, but attacking a foe who can't counter by using a bow reduces the damage by infinity, which is a higher number than 20 last time I checked. Yes, I know that's not always an option for the Tome and Dagger users of late game Rev, but I still don't think the combination of both defensive blows is particularly worthwhile. At the end of the day, to me at least, this still feels worse than giving Reina another bow class. The most significant downside to marrying a Corrinsexual is the Corrinsexuals tend to be bad parents for Kana. Although Kana is a pretty bad unit in their own right, so I don't see this as a huge deal. Among Corrinsexuals, Reina is one of the better ones, acting as kind of a soft version of Azura, since she passes Sky Knight alongside decent strength and speed. She will likely be able to pass a better skill than Azura, since you're not reclassing your dancer just to help fucking Kana out, but other than that, she's mostly a worse mom. But you're not marrying Reina for the sake of Kana. There are plenty of other mothers who can bolster that worthless child. The main reason to get engaged to Reina is because you want to benefit her, and that is a good enough reason. Reina is a very good unit, and it is not unusual to give good units strong resources. If you do end up marrying Corrin to Reina, Reina's support bonuses are actually really good, and they complement Kinshi Knight quite nicely. Her personal bonuses are entirely speed and strength, giving 1 speed at C, 1 strength at B, an additional point of speed at A, and an additional point of both at S. This is a total of 2 strength and 3 speed from Reina's personals alone. Kinshi Knight adds 2 more speed to this for a total of 5, alongside 2 skill, 2 luck, and 1 move. And if you go with Archer talent, then Sniper complements Reina even better, with 3 speed and 2 strength, for a grand total of 6 speed, 4 strength, 3 skill at S support. If only Xander could marry Reina. Now, you may think that these bonuses are kind of pointless. After all, Reina is a very good combat unit, she shouldn't be on backpack duty. But my philosophy around backpacks is I would much rather have someone who can perform both roles competently than someone who is limited to only being in the back. That way, if you have 2 units pair up with each other and one of them takes enough damage that they need to heal, you have the option of delaying that healing and switching your backpack to the front to allow them to do some combat. Alternatively, if the units working in conjunction are good at fighting different enemy types, then this can also be beneficial. If a mage and a physical unit are paired together, you can have the mage fight the low res enemies while the physical unit fights the low defense ones. This is doubly true if you have a flyer paired with a non-flyer. The flyer can escort the non-flyer around and then switch to backpack duty when there are bows nearby. You can then have the grounded unit switch back to the flyer when it's time to go over terrain again. Honestly, these bonuses are so good that even if you're not marrying Reina, it's worth considering getting the A support just so you can benefit from the first 3 levels of them. Because of how limited Reina's class pool is, she doesn't really have a build potential. Instead, she fills a role as a generically good combat unit. With this in mind, I think it's pertinent to look at Reina's performance in every chapter from her join until Endgame, and see just how well she holds up throughout the campaign. Her performance will, of course, vary depending on how much experience you feed her and how lucky or unlucky you get with growth rates. Although oftentimes you can offset the downside of either an unlucky or underleveled Reina by giving her special attention in the form of tonics, meals, or better weapons. In Chapter 11, Reina begins the map as a green unit, and you want to rush Corrin to recruit her as quickly as possible because left unchecked, her AI can be a little unpredictable. She only has an Iron Naginata in her inventory, so you are going to have to trade her a bow, but there is an Iron Bow that drops in Chapter 10, so you'll have at least one available. And it's also very possible to purchase her a bronze bow, or even forge a bronze +1. This map features a variety of enemy types covering all aspects of the weapon triangle, so immediately Reina's ability to control it comes in handy. But perhaps more notably, this is the first instance of generic promoted enemies, some incredibly scary master ninjas. Due to their iron shurikens, they effectively have 19 speed and will double a large amount of your army. But with Darting Blow, Reina has 25 effective speed, allowing her to turn the tables and double them. She 3-shots them with an iron bow or a bronze +1, so you can wait at the end of their range in order to bait an attack on enemy phase, and then attack them on player phase for a grand total of 3 attacks, instantly killing them. Although Reina does need some healing to pull off this maneuver because the ninja themselves pack quite a punch, being able to 3-shot her in turn. Reina does also need to be careful with her positioning because there's a smattering of archer throughout the map, but flight brings more advantages than disadvantages due to the large amount of forests, including some impassable thickets that Reina can easily navigate through. Reina is also 1 damage shy of one-shotting the Diviners with the Steel Lance, so any amount of strength support helps here, but the Diviners are not the most threatening or difficult to kill enemies, so personally, I would recommend feeding these kills to your training projects rather than Reina, as she will not be getting much experience from them. Chapter 12 is a great map for Reina for a couple of reasons. First off, if you're just trying to beat the map as quickly as possible, Reina is essential for the 1 turn. With either shove, swap, or a plus move pair up, Reina can reach Flora on turn 1, although you have to attack from 2 range, so watch out for Icy Blood. If you double, the threshold for killing Flora is 35 attack. With a bronze +2, Reina reaches 27, although that can be brought up to 31 with a meal and tonic. Finally, a promoted Rinka or Hinata can give 4 strength as Oni Chieftain, although you don't even have to jump through all of these loops for Reina to help you 1-turn the map. because if you give Reina a move pair up instead of devoting a unit to swapping or shoving her, then you can fill the other 2 deployment slots on the northeast boat with Azura and a flyer carrying another combat unit to finish off Flora after Reina does the majority of her damage. While this is impressive, and I bring it up to show just how dominant Reina's performance is, I would actually recommend against one-turning this or any map in Fates. You miss out on the concrete reward of one of your Master Seals by not killing the Berserker on the southwest boat, and low turning a Fates map also costs you experience, weapon rank, and the ability to build supports, as the number of support points you can get per map are capped with each pair. I don't think you need to route every single map in the game, but I do think it's worthwhile to have all of the units you want to pair with each other do some amount of combat to build support points on every map, and one-turning just does not allow for that. I also personally find that having Reina kill Flora over and over gets boring on repeat playthroughs, but that is a more subjective reason. If you do choose to engage with Chapter 12 more honestly, Reina once again is incredibly useful. In fact, more so than in Chapter 11. Chapter 12 is a very flight-intensive map. Your units start out all on separate ships, isolated from each other. And the idea is you need to find squads of 3 for each ship to hold the line. However, flyers can help you circumvent this by escorting people from one ship to the other, using the pair-up system. Additionally, while enemies can move on the ice, they have severely reduced movement, whereas your flyers will have complete control. This allows Reina to run circles around some of the dangerous promoted enemies, and she can even aggro them away from your frailer units if you're trying to hold the ships on the left-hand side. Personally, one of my favorite strategies to do with Reina is to have her bait the Berserkers away from the rest of my units, long enough for the Dragon Veins to show up so we can have ice bridges available when we engage the Berserkers. When making the final approach to Flora's ship, there are quite a few threatening sorcerers and Berserkers, meaning that when you pull up the ice bridge, it can be overwhelming and your Dragon Vein user might actually get killed. However, you can mitigate this once again with the power of flight, by having your flyers, especially Reina, bait the sorcerers onto the ice. You can engage them separately from each other for a much safer approach. The last thing to note is that this chapter does have 2 flying sub-bosses, in Camilla and Baruka, and as a bow user, Reina can obviously make quick work of them. If you're training other bow units like Takumi or Mozu, then Baruka is probably better to feed to them, since she is an unpromoted unit. But Camilla is free reign for anyone. Your unpromoted units will definitely gain more from it, but Reina is a promoted unit and she wants the opportunities for EXP if she can take them. Chapter 13 has a large number of threatening sword enemies, including 2 sub-bosses in the form of Xander and Ryoma. If you've done Keldori's Paralogue early, then you will be able to give the Sword Catcher to Reina or one of your other Lance users to deal big damage to these folks. Although they are technically optional, you can just use the Dragon Vein to bypass them. Personally, I like at the very least killing Xander because the promoted experience is really nice, and doubly so for Reina. This map does feature a decent number of bow units, with archers on the right-hand side and outlaws on the left. So you do want to be a little bit careful in your positioning. But there is also a large body of water until you drain the Dragon Vein. So Reina can take advantage of this flyers-only terrain to do some shenanigans. This map also features the return of promoted Master Ninjas, although they are much slower, with only 16 speed factoring in the Shuriken boost, thus making it possible for more of your units to double them than just Reina. Still, Reina has advantage over them, so that is going to be doing a lot of work for you. There are 3 more flying enemies here, 2 unpromoted Wyverns, and a sub-boss Scarlet. Personally, I think you should feed the unpromoted Wyverns to some of your lower level bow users, but Scarlet being promoted means that she's yummy EXP candy for Reina, and Reina is a good way of handling her. Just watch out for Ryoma. Reina can also help you blitz through this map. It's not a one-turn like the other one, but you can just fly across the water and beat up the boss in conjunction with Camilla, another powerful flyer that you get handed in between chapters 12 and 13. Camilla and Reina actually work very well together. Camilla has more bulk, but she lacks bow access, meaning that if she's going to attack from range, she either has to use a hand axe or some tomes with her weaker magic stat. Between the two of them, they have the entire weapon triangle covered, and they can cover each other's weaknesses in terms of effectiveness. Camilla is able to wield the hammer, whereas Reina is able to use the Beast Killer. Reina can also take advantage of Rose's Thorns if she needs a little bit of extra damage to secure kills. There are some upcoming maps where I think it's more beneficial to split the two of them up, but there's also a few where the two of them can do some great work together as a combined air force. Chapter 14 is when the level 2 shop becomes available, and depending on what you're willing to purchase, Reina might have some extra tools at her disposal. With the large number of paladins, great knights, and bow knights in mid-game Rev, I think the Beast Killer is a near essential purchase. And any team that's running bow users appreciates the dual Yumi. Even if you didn't get Kaldori's Paralogue, you might want to purchase a sword catcher, although personally I'm less of a fan of the Hoshiden effective weapons than the Norian ones, since enemies in Rev usually have two weapon types, making them harder to leverage. Not only that, but these weapons have lower might, so oftentimes they miss one-shot thresholds. Regardless of what you purchase for her though, Reina is going to be quite good in Chapter 14. With the Beast Killer, she can quite easily delete enemy paladins, or if you have it on another unit, she can take advantage of their dual strikes with flexibility due to bow access and flight. And this principle also applies to Keaton and Caden if you didn't bother purchasing the Beast Killer. Unfortunately, she has a much worse matchup against the generals, as their 25 defense means she is dealing single-digit damage. Rev generals don't have Wary Fighter, so that is at least an upside, but I would primarily focus on having Reina kill the paladins as opposed to the generals. Although, if you do need to have her fight the armored foes, she can take advantage of magical or hammer dual strikes in order to deal good deals of damage, in the same way that I suggested with the Beast Killer. There are a few outlaws to watch out for on this map, but in general, flight access is going to be more beneficial than detrimental. There's a large body of water, and while you can pull a Takumi and lower the water, it's quite far away from your starting position, and I actually think leaving the water in place is more beneficial since it can let you herd the paladin reinforcements into specific spaces to feed your Skrunkly's kills. However, even if you lower the water, flight remains at a premium in this map, as escorting Elise throughout both sides of the map is important if you want to recruit Charlotte and Benny, only to steal their weapons and bench them forever. While you could accomplish this ferry with grounded units, it's much faster to do so with flying units, and gives you more flexibility, since Charlotte is on a boat and Benny is on the other side of a wall. Chapter 15 is the first map since Reina joined where flight has no benefit, as there is no terrain inside the Rainbow Sage's tower. While flight will once again become a premium tool upon entering Vala, if you wanted to dip into a grounded class either to gain skills or build weapon ranks, now would be a decent time to do so, as over the next stretch of 3 chapters, there's very limited use for flight. Alternatively, Rainbow Sage is a map that features a deployment cut, and your slots will grow once again in Chapter 18. As a result of this, it's not unreasonable to temporarily bench your flyers, especially Reina since she cannot build support with any characters other than Corrin. If you're focusing on finishing up support chains for some of the earlier characters you don't plan on using long term, this might be a good opportunity to do just that. If you do choose to field Reina, she has actually a pretty rough time on this map. Aside from Shura and the boss, the only promoted enemies here are generals, who Reina does actually struggle against. Depending on how many levels you've gotten her in the previous chapters, she might be able to scrap some experience from the level 15 unpromoted people, but it's also very possible that she's gotten to the EXP cap for them as well. Additionally, the structure of this map makes it more difficult to blitz with your player face units, and as a result, it's one of the few that places an emphasis on your bulky people. This makes it a great introduction for the new recruit Silas, but as far as Reina is concerned, it's probably her worst map to date. Although that pattern does not continue in Chapter 15, because Reina actually has quite a decent performance. There are a large number of bow enemies, both outlaws and adventurers, so you need to be careful of them. But there's also some firewalls that Reina can pelt enemies over, And depending on how you manipulate them with Dragon Veins, you can pretty easily set up Reina to enemy phase either mages or hand axes. Not only that, but this map is once again very movement intensive, as Corrin and company start in the bottom left, but Ryoma and co start in the top left. And while Ryoma is definitely capable of holding his own, the same cannot be said of the people around him. As a result of that, getting the two groups to meet up as quickly as possible is essential if you want characters like Setsuna and Scarlet to see the end credits. Especially Scarlet, she's in a lot of danger on this map, and it would be horrible if she died. It is worth noting, there's a very reliable strategy for blitzing this map that doesn't involve Reina at all. Ryoma can just pair into Scarlet and move full move to the right 2 turns in a row, and he has a 100% chance to one-round the boss. Much like with Chapter 12, I find this to be unfun, and not only that, but it costs you the opportunity for support points and experience. And there's also a droppable killer bow you might not get, but like, Fate's killer weapon. Chapter 17 is a very big map for effective damage, as all but 2 enemies will take effective damage from either anti-armor or anti-beast weapons. If Reina is still in a lance-wielding class, she can get tons of experience from promoted enemies with the Beast Killer, although this trait is not unique to her, as there are plenty of other lance units available at this time. Flight definitely isn't useless here, but I wouldn't describe it as being at a premium. There's a big mountain in the north of the map that flyers can use for better positioning, and there's some forests to pass through that flyers get to ignore the terrain penalty of, but there's also some scary bow knights and a couple of ballista, so it's a big catch-22. I also tend to find that on this map, bulk thresholds are significantly more important than offensive ones, since most people can leverage effective weapons or dual strikes in order to secure kills even against the promoted foes. Meanwhile, having the bulk to take a hit or even 2 from these scary high move enemies allows you to create a wall using the mountain and the fort. Funny enough though, Reina isn't useless at this job, as you might expect. She doubles most of the enemies at base, even without Darting Blow, but if you give her a weak enough weapon to not one-round them, she won't suffer from success. And most of the enemies in the initial rush do not have 2 range, so with careful positioning, you can ensure that nobody in your wall formation takes more than 1 attack. Alternatively, if you want to blitz this map, Reina can be part of a Flyer's strike force to rush Iago. There are ballistae and fire orbs meant to discourage these tactics, but it is still very possible to abuse pair-up with grounded units in the back, so that the flying units take ballista damage, but then the grounded units are the ones actually doing combat once you get to Iago. If you're approaching the map this way, flight is significantly more important than if you're playing it quote-unquote honestly, but like with the other low turns I discussed, I tend to find that it is more rewarding to engage with the map and gain support points and experience. Chapter 18 is the start of the Vala arc, and from now on, every enemy you face in main story chapters will be promoted. Vala is often seen as a pretty harsh difficulty spike in comparison to the pre-Vala chapters, and it's easy to see why. Enemies are scaled up to kind of absurd numbers. But Reina is made of different stuff, and even at base, she's capable of doubling every enemy on the map with simply Darting Blow and a Speed Tonic. And the Speed Tonic is only necessary for Adventurers, Swordmasters, and Master Ninjas. She doubles everyone else with Darting Blow at base without needing any speed support. And tonics are not the only way that you can bolster her speed. If you're tight on cash, just give her an Archer pair-up. Or Swordmaster, you got plenty of those lying around. Rally Speed is also the most accessible rally in Revelation. So while it's possible you don't have it online yet, it's likely that you do. And with a Rally Speed, she doubles every enemy on the map. Heck, with a Rally Speed and a Speed Tonic, Reina doubles everything on enemy phase. And all of this is simply assuming Reina is at her base stats. If you've been using Reina, she's leveled speed. Now, that's not to say that this map is trivialized by Reina. There's a number of threatening bow enemies, and her frailty remains an issue, in fact becomes more of one from now onwards. But the ability to fly and have good offenses at 2 range remain strong. This map's gimmick is you are meant to split your army in half, because there are some one-way teleporters that'll send you to either the left or right half of the stage. You need to activate 8 Dragon Veins before you can fight the boss, 3 on each side of the map and 2 in the middle in a bridge connecting the 2 halves. And while you could just move your army in one continuous death ball, you're discouraged from doing so, as each of the Dragon Veins is on a fort that will spawn reinforcements until you activate the vein. As a side note, yes, this is technically a way to get infinite grinding, so go off, you Eternal Seal-pilled fiends. Splitting up your army is of course more dangerous than all moving at once, because if one side finds themselves outmatched, it's kinda game over for them. But flyers can mitigate this because they are able to fly across the gaps in the emptiness, in order to connect the 2 sides before you get to their connecting bridge. Not only that, but flyers can often utilize their ability to hide in the emptiness to attack enemies who cannot counter them. And even if you're not using flight to cheese the gimmick, there are a few points in the map that have 1 tile wide rope bridges, and having a flyer or 2 to be able to position more easily can help you take out enemies holding these defensive points. The right-hand side is definitely safer for flyers than the left-hand side. There's a lot of scary bow units in the left, especially the bottom left. But regardless of what direction you go, Reina will prove herself useful once more. Unfortunately, Chapter 19 is a little bit rougher for Reina. There is some terrain on the north side of the map that she can fly over, and there's even some forests and walls to take advantage of in the south. But by and large, this map emphasizes enemy phasing more than any other in the game. If you want to get all of the droppable items on the bottom half of the map, you're going to want to take advantage of bulky units capable of fighting foes at 1-2 range. And the game did just hand you 2 of them, in Ryoma and Xander. There are other options, such as a trained up ninja or mage, but in general, Reina doesn't fit the bill. Even if you reclassed her into a dagger class, she's just not bulky enough to take on large groups of enemies. And there's a turn limit, so you can't afford to turtle. You do want to have people who can afford to extend themselves out far. Now, Reina still isn't useless for this strategy. High movement and high offenses means that picking off stragglers after your enemy phase units did their work is the sort of thing that Reina can make short work of. But while previous maps had Reina as the star of the show, this one has her as more of a filler unit, on cleanup duty more than anything. Not only that, but the bottom half of the map has a smattering of bow knights, who are quite threatening due to their long range and flyer effectiveness. Considering that this is another map with a deploy cut, I personally think it's best to let Reina rest for Chapter 19. She's going to be putting in a lot of work in 20 after all. Chapter 20 is another big map for flight. The map features a bunch of islands floating in emptiness, alongside a series of dragon veins that can be used to rearrange bridges. In order to get from place to place, your grounded units need to go over these bridges, which means you not only have to spend a turn rearranging them, but you also need to push through some pretty tricky 1 and 2 tile wide choke points, which the enemy can take advantage of with armors. Flyers, of course, get to say no and just skip this gimmick, and it appears that the enemy got this memo as well, because this map features a large number of Falcoknights and Kinshi Knights. While the Kinshi are threatening to your flyers, including Reina, Reina can still fight back with effective damage of her own from bows, especially if she got air superiority. Due to the combination of flight and bows both being incredibly useful, this is the first map since Camilla joined where it feels like Reina significantly outshines her. If you've been doing some reclassing shenanigans, this is also a map where flying lock touch is useful, because while a few chests are on your way to the main objective, there's also 2 in the top right that are very far out of the way. One of those is just the Dragonstone Plus, so you can probably skip it, but the other one is a Wakizashi, which is a useful 2-range option for sword users or can be sold for a decent amount of gold. It's nothing earth-shattering, but it is nice to have. Chapter 21 is another indoor map, so there's not anything for Reina to fly over. And the map features a large number of bow enemies, so flight is once again a bit of a detriment. That being said, this map does feature a lot of walls you can bait 2-range enemies into attacking over, so there's quite a few opportunities to set up enemy phase for bow units. This is particularly helpful if fighting against ninjas and maids, although Reina can use the dual Yumi to fight the various mages as well. There are 2 more flight-intensive maps after this one, but I do still think it's worth considering giving Reina or any of your other flying units reclasses to avoid bow weakness. Reina being able to grab Mechanist is also nice because there's quite a few scattered chests, and being able to have Replicate and Lock Touch is good for splitting up and getting all of them. Overall, I would say this map is a bit of a weak showing for Reina, but that's grading on a curve. Reina is still doing fine. Chapter 22, on the other hand, is a good map for Reina. It features more flying enemies, although not as many as Chapter 20 did, and it features some forests to fly over. The gimmick of this map is you need to use Dragon Veins to burn down the forest so you can access all of the treasure chests in the middle, but I tend to find that it is a lot easier to just take advantage of the flying units and ignore the gimmick altogether. Sure, there's a few snipers and mechanists meant to keep them in check, but a lot of these units are isolated from each other and unable to reach too many tiles on the map until you burn down the trees. If you avoid engaging with the gimmick entirely, you can just overwhelm the enemy forces since they tend to be isolated in groups of 2 or 3. This is once again a map where flight and lock touch combined is very valuable, as there are some chests that are guarded by a large number of ninjas that you either need to burn the trees or fly to access. But since this is a siege map, you can have your flyers go over and unlock them right before you seize the throne. Chapter 23 is the final map where there's anything for Reina to fly over, but it is once again a big one. The gimmick here is there are 4 tile-wide platforms that move between floating islands on every turn. For your grounded units to make it across the map, they need to use these elevators. Since you have more than 8 deployment slots, this limits your movement capabilities unless you have flyers to once again cross the emptiness connecting the islands. There's a couple of flyers on this map, including Scarlet, reanimated from the dead, and Reina can shoot them down before they become a problem. And once again, the combination of flight and lock touch comes in handy, as the 2 westernmost islands each have some chests on them, but they are guarded by very strong foes. Because of the way that the elevator mechanics work, it can be difficult to safely engage with these enemies. But you can avoid that by just having a flying lock toucher open the chests right before you seize the throne. Chapter 24 does have the option to be tackled as a stealth map, but if you are engaging with it as a combat challenge, then I would highly recommend reclassing Reina either to Mechanist or to whatever Corrin Marriage has provided her, as this map features a large number of bow enemies. Because of the way that the rooms are structured, bows are at a premium here, as you can bait the various shuriken, bow, and tome enemies into attacking you over walls, giving you the potential to do good enemy phase. And as a bonus, there are also some flying enemies here that didn't get the memo about an indoor map not benefiting flight. The fastest enemies on this map are Master Ninjas with an effective speed of 32, meaning that you need to reach 37 speed in order to double them. The average level 15 Reina has between 29 and 30 speed. Assuming worst case scenario, Darting Blow pushes her up to 33. And Rally Speed pushes her up to 37. If you take the Mechanist reclass that I suggested, you do lose 1 point of speed from this number, but this is before accounting for sources like meals, tonics, fancy footwork, inspiring song, stat boosters, pair up. There's so many ways to affect your stats in Fates, it's ridiculous. And this is notable because these Master Ninjas are the fastest enemies you'll face until Endgame. And Endgame Master Ninjas and Sword Masters are at most 2 points faster than these ones. What I'm saying is that Reina is very capable of doubling every single unit in the game, so long as you feed her a healthy amount of experience. Level 15 in Chapter 24 is not even over-leveled. Yes, Reina faces counter, so it's not like this is a turn off your brain and on a wid button a la Seth or Marcus, but it is incredibly strong for the high stat benchmarks that Revelations introduces. Chapter 25 is, in my experience, the last big map before Endgame, as both 26 and 27 are very skippable kill boss objectives. The gimmick here is a series of moving elevators, but you can leverage the elevator doors as one tile-wide choke points. And whenever this is the case, it is very possible to enemy phase with bows, which is nice because there are some scary ninjas. Not as scary as in the previous chapter, but it's still appreciated to have Reina to deal with them. Alternatively, there are some more indoor flyers for her to shoot down, and plenty of tome enemies that she can use the dual Yumi on. Overall, this map is similarly to 19, more enemy phase focused than player phase focused just due to the way that the elevator mechanic works, but Reina can still make some good use of her player phase combat by deleting select units to make things safer for your juggernauts. While I recommended against skipping early and mid-game chapters, I don't think the same is true of the endgame. Chapters 26 and 27 can give you a little bit of experience going into endgame, but your units should be at their maximum capabilities by this point. As such, I think there's very little to be gained from going for supports or even droppable items on the maps. Are you really going to use the Nosferatu in a chest in Chapter 26? I don't think so. If you choose to play these maps traditionally, then Reina can be useful at deleting enemies, although it is difficult to do so from a safe position because they're both pretty wide open. But I'll be honest, it's been ages since the last time I played the map without rescue skipping to flex on Gunther. So I don't have too much to say about Reina's performance. If you trained her up, she'll be quite good here, but that's true of every unit in the cast. And the same applies to Endgame, to be quite honest. Endgame is more of a quote-unquote real map than 26 and 27 are, but I still think 25 serves as the final exam for most Rev campaigns. I do want to briefly touch on all the child paralogues because Reina's quite useful in them as well. Kana's Paralogue has a couple of central rivers that flight is good on, and there's scary Falcoknights, so yay, bows are good here too. Shigure's map has a bunch of ships, being able to fly between them is a definitive advantage. Dwyer's map has scary ninjas that Reina can outspeed at triangle advantage. Sophie's map has a lot of forests and water that flight is really good for passing. Midori's map gets cheesed by flight so hard it's not even funny. You're supposed to chase down Candace, but if you just fly over the trees, you can actually be ahead of her. Shiro's map is in the desert, and Kiragi's map is all flyers, so once again, wins for Reina. Saizo's map, Asuji's map, is the first one where there's not really much benefit to flight, but higher movement is still good. Selkie, Mitama, Rajat, Kaldori, and Hisame all have very terrain-heavy maps, but whether it be rivers, wastes, or forests, Reina is more than capable of surpassing them. And that pattern continues as we move into the Norian children, because Percy, Ignatius, and Valoria all feature maps with mountains and time constraints. And Soleil's map is similarly tense, with high movement and the ability to fly over forests and rivers being incredibly valuable. The only paralogues that Reina doesn't feel phenomenal in are forests and Nina's, but that's still a very good track record when it comes to optional maps. I guess technically if you delay Mozu long enough, Reina's also good on that map, but like, are you really doing that? Are you really gonna let Mozu just sit there surrounded by Faceless while you play the campaign for 4 more chapters until you get Reina? Are you really going to do that, you heartless monster? Are you really going to do that? But getting back on topic, as an overall picture, the majority of maps Reina is a standout unit on. She shines at most in the mid-game shortly after she joins because there's not much competition, but even in the late game, if just given minor resources such as experience and heart seals, she can continue to be an incredibly potent force on your team. And if you choose to give her major resources like Corrin Marriage, she can keep pace with the rest of them and be one of your primary combat units. If this were practically any game other than Fire Emblem Fates, Reina would have a real shot at being the #1 unit. But this is Fire Emblem Fates, so not only is the cast incredibly stacked, but the support system is at its absolute most important, both for building your own units and for gaining access to paralogues. And the paralogues are of particular note because they give you the motivation to finish support chains between characters that you might not be fielding the entire campaign. Even if you don't want to add a unit like Hisame or Kaldori to your army, their paralogues are valuable as they provide the opportunity to train units you do plan on using long term. And this isn't just a little bit of extra experience. Most paralogues, in particular the ones associated with birthright or cross-route children, will be predominantly made up of enemies at a higher level than the ones you face in the main story. However, because these paralogues were meant to be available in the birthright route, which is marketed as the easiest of the trilogy, the devs wanted to make the maps less challenging than main story maps in Rev and Conquest. And as a result to that, the risk-reward ratio for these chapters are often sky high. A couple of standout examples include Shiguri's Paralogue, which has reinforcements that are easily farmable and abusable, Mitama's Paralogue with a ton of stationary berserkers, and Kiragi's Paralogue, which consists entirely of flying enemies on a map where you are handed a strong bow unit. Because of how overleveled your enemies are in these maps, they can allow you to leapfrog the EXP curve, and be far more prepared for the main story chapters than the devs expected you to be when they designed the maps. Not only that, but doing these paralogues in the mid or late game is probably the easiest way to get level 15 promoted skills unlocked. This is especially true if you want to unlock multiple promoted skills in conjunction, such as a fair skill and life and death. But it's not just for getting endgame builds online. If you want a rally bot, they are going to have to spend quite a lot of time in promoted classes. And while rallies are universally at promoted level 5 instead of 15, getting 3 rallies online is usually going to take until promoted level 11, and 4 rallies takes until 14. You can alleviate this process a little bit by learning some unpromoted skills before you go for the rallies, but that's going to cost way more seals and, in my opinion, is a much less elegant solution than simply paralogue chaining. And one of the cool advantages to racking up paralogues is they snowball upon each other, because the support system in Fates places a cap on how many points you can gain in a single map, and as a result of that, most S supports take 7 chapters to unlock. Although a fast marriage only takes 6 maps, a friendship takes 5, and a fast friendship only takes 4. However, all of the paralogues, as well as the invasion maps and the optional skirmishes, do count as chapters for this purpose. Theoretically, since Rev has infinite grinding, you could just unlock the child maps via skirmishes, but many people don't like engaging with skirmishes, myself included, and so under my criteria, I disqualify them. Therefore, the next best way to gain access to the child characters early is to build supports in paralogues. If you spend the first half of the game getting your early game squad married to each other, then you'll have several paralogues available for the second half of the game to set up additional marriages. As a result of this, the more you focus on supports, the easier it becomes to build additional supports, which makes additional supports easier, and like I said, it snowballs on itself. But anytime you field a Corrinsexual, you are, at least in theory, taking away from this potential. Reina might make better use of a Kaze backpack than Effie does, but you won't unlock Midori's Paralogue through pairing Kaze with Reina. And while it's far from mandatory to unlock full recruitment, the way I see it, the more Paralogue options you have, the better. But see, here's the catch. While it is definitely a detriment to your Paralogue routing to deploy a Corrinsexual, it is in no way, shape, or form going to stop you from building all of the supports that you want. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that because Corrin is force deployed in every chapter, and Azura is a unit who you probably should deploy in every, or at least almost every chapter, there's a distinct possibility that you will have some units deployed on every map that are not actively working on support chains. Azura in particular can only get 1 friendship and 1 marriage. And even stating that, marriage is usually the only thing she'll go for, since Azura getting married gives you access to 2 paralogues, whereas Azura getting a friendship doesn't really help her or the people in her friendship pool, aside from Corrin. In addition to that, depending on what pairings you're going for, there may be some units that you're deploying because you want to train them whose spouses have not arrived yet. For example, if you want Mozu to give Sniper to Keaton, then she's probably not going to do it as a level 1 villager. So you want to deploy and train her on the maps prior to chapter 13, but at the same time, she's not building a romantic support. With this in mind, I think it's actually quite feasible to fit Reina in most chapters, and if she needs to take the occasional chapter off so that other people can build support points, she has the level and stats to afford to do so. Chapters 12, 13, and 14 each give you 12 slots to deal with, meaning that there are only 10 remaining, which is an even number, and Reina wouldn't fit in without interrupting a support chain, except for that Azura and Corrin might have their spouses from those 10, and even if they don't, there might be people who are waiting for their spouses to show up. Chapter 15 only has 9 units available, and chapters 16 and 17 only have 10, and these maps are potentially points where Reina might want to take a short vacation, especially since this is around the point in the game where the units who joined in chapters 9, 10, and 11 will start getting married, and so you might only be 1 or 2 maps away from finishing a support chain so you can bench scrubs like Hinata and Rinka. Aside from chapter 19, which has a huge deployment cut only allowing for 8 units, most of the rest of Vala has 12 to 14 slots. With this many slots available, you can usually find room for a Corrinsexual, or even 2, especially if you are deploying multiple second generation units, because their support options end up being more limited due to not being able to do cross-generational supports, and as a result of this, depending on how many children are in your army, some or all of them may be functionally Corrinsexuals. If Valoria is the only Norian kid on your squad, then she's not going to have anyone to talk to. I don't want to overstate the problem. Reina does get in the way of support routing, as do any of the other Corrinsexuals, and for hyper-optimized routes, there may be times where you just decide to drop her partway through. I find myself leaving her behind more and more often these days simply because I want to do a bunch of silly builds, and the sillier your builds are, the more you have to optimize supports. But I also don't want to overstate the problem. As powerful as it is to stack multiple Paralogues, you don't need to get every single one. It's okay if Saizo dies a virgin. He wanted it this way. He tried to explode himself at the end of chapter 8. So, where does this leave us in terms of the tier list? Well, hopefully it doesn't surprise anyone that Rev Reina ends up in S tier, but I think she is a low S tier, and if I had to make a prediction, it would be that she's going to end up at the bottom of S tier. It's impossible to deny her combat strengths, but it's also impossible to deny the weaknesses bestowed upon her by the lack of supports. She's less flexible than other units, and if you want to give her extra classes, you need to give her favoritism in the form of Corrin Marriage. It's favoritism that she arguably deserves, but it is favoritism nonetheless. Interfering with the ability to build supports amongst your other units is also something I count against her. Although it's not as harsh as it may seem, and while early on Reina basically has a free spot in every squad, as the game expands, there are more support challenged units fighting over the limited number of slots that you can afford to give to a non-supporting character, such as the Gen 2 units who can't support any of the Gen 1 characters, or the other strong Corrinsexuals in Shura and Fuga. And Flora. And Flora, right? Flora's also a strong Corrinsexual. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Have you ever married Reina, and if so, what class did you give her? When you play Fates, regardless of the route, do you typically include Corrinsexuals on your team, or do you ditch them to make room for the units you want to get married? I'm curious to hear what other people's experiences are in the comments. And while you're down there, make sure you include today's comment code word, which is boots. If you include boots in your comment, then I'll know you made it to the end of the video. Speaking of which, now it's time for me to thank my patrons. Thank you to my patrons: Eris, Michael Kraus, Len, Gameboo, Karosa, Fyrant, Smaz Ruby, Zycrom, Robin D, Lizard Bongwater, Christopher Bueno, Marin McLean, Calamity Callie, Thaythom, Andu, Reflect, A Clever Username of Lies, YLO1, George Grenville the 7th PM, Jamie Collins, Mean Jojo, Thick Molder, Arvis, Tailored Muffin, Floa Hay, Faulty Videos, Lyra, Toaster But Really, Kyle Madison, Derek Williams, Bell Wenska, Dysike, Ginger, Root Beer Pants, Queen Elizam, Aerith Emblem, Adele, Gabe the Green, Controlled Aegis, Roman Cormancic, Knick Knack Hammersmack, SUP, Caius Cole, and Some Trades. And a special shout out to my Jagans, Autumn Kelsey, and Lilzabeth. If you would like to get your name in the credits, as well as early access to videos and polls that determine future videos, including the order in which I cover Rev characters, then there is a link to my Patreon below. but please only donate if you can comfortably afford to do so. I don't want anyone going broke over Fire Emblem. Free ways to support the channel include liking, subscribing, and commenting, so I would super love if you do those as well. Especially since I'm almost at 10k subscribers and it would be awesome to hit that goal. 5 digits is a little bit overwhelming, if I'm being honest, but exciting. Still, I think I've taken up enough of your time, so I'm just gonna say, have a wonderful day. Stay safe, gamers.